It's later, good time.
So things will be busy today. Some months ago. Okay. Dr. Hill Gemara. I'm going to ask you if you remember where we're up to, because I've been to it in different places now. Gufa Amar B'Shul Ben Levi. Okay, so yesterday, as it turns out, was the yahrzeit of the Maribe Rav. The Maribe Rav was the Dayan in Tzfas who held you could have smicha, and the Maralbach in Yerushalayim held you couldn't have smicha, and one of the reasons why they wanted to recreate smicha, this is back in the early 1400s, is because the Moranos who were coming to Holland after finally escaping were over cursed many times because they didn't have access to mikvahs. And they were disheartened to continue on in Yiddishkeit because if we have already cursed, if our neshamas are nichras loylam vod, even though loylam abba, so what motivation do we have to come back? We were nichras. So we learned in our Gemara that if you get malchus, that's what we just learned from Rab Chanina ben Gamliel, right? If you get malchus, it pops up the chorus. But the shaila that they had was maybe in our Gemara you have to have asra, and if you have a proper asra for malchus, then malchus could pot the chorus. But still to give a guy malchus, that's going to pot you from chorus. So the Maribe Rav from Tzvatzel, yes, even if Bezin gives malchus today, even though there was no asra and sak b'shas ma'isa, it would still pot him from chorus. And the Marbach said nonsense. So that was part of the machlokes as to whether they should reinstate smicha, was whether or not the malchus would help for chorus. Because in order to be able to paskin malchus, you have to be bezin. So kul moidi need a bezin to paskin, but could the bezin paskin to give malchus if there was no straw? You had to warn him of malchus. That they didn't have there. So that was the question if that malchus would work. And the argument of where the smicha ended up, I don't know if that where it was denigrating into a very personal machlokes, because what happened is eventually the Maharal Bach told the Mariba Rav, I know why you want it so much, because I remember what you used to do when you were a teenager, and you probably need it for your own self. That's how nasty the machlokes ended up getting. Zok to Gemara Gufa. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. We're about halfway down on that Kimmel and base. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Shloisha Dvarim also Bezin Shalmata Viskimu Bezin Shalmaila al Yodam. Three things Bezin Shalmata did, and the Bezin Shalmaila was masking to them. Elohein, these are they. Mikra Megillah. Ushe'ela Shalom B'Shem. So Mikra Megillah, we laid the Megillah on for him. She'ela Shalom B'Shem is, that's coming up. We're getting closer to Shavuaos, where you saw how Boaz addressed people Shalom Alecha, or using Shem Hashem. Okay, that was one shot. The other shot is that there's a chiyuv to greet somebody, and the third thing was Vavos Meiser. Rashi says either it means that there was a knas that the Leviim don't get Meiser exclusively; it goes to Kohanim, or it goes to both of them. That was one thing. The other thing might be is the Terabon Takana of Meiser and Paris. Paris Elam. So Mikra Megillah, the Chsiv, Kimu v'kiblu ha-Yehudim. Kimu l'mayla, masha kiblu l'mata. That's the Kimu v'kiblu. You see that it was accepted from Shemayim. And if anybody was by the Tzei Ulamad right before Purim, we got a very good insight in what Kimu v'kiblu means. It was setting up Klal Yisrael to be able to reach the Gula Sida, to pass through the Guls, to get to the Gula Sida, by accepting that Chazal, or the Bezin of the time, can actually make up halachas because that's really what's going to allow us to be able to roll with the punches and with the reality to come to the Geula. I hope I paraphrase that well.
Exactly, but good enough. Thanks for the plug.
Okay. U'she'ela shalom and she'ela shalom d'chsiv v'nei boyaz ba min beis lechem v'yomer l'koytchem Hashem imachem v'omer Hashem imcha giber hachayil my v'omer. Why did we need a second pasuk of Hashem imcha giber hachayil, which is not by Boyaz? If you look up that pasuk, that is by, I believe, by Gidon. That's by Gidon. My v'omer v'chitem and Boyaz who da'avad midaite u'mishemayah. If you're going to say, just because we quoted Boyaz as saying Hashem Yimachem, who said that's the right thing to do? But Hashem Yimachem is the Navi talking to Gidon, Tashma, V'omer Hashem Imcha Gibor Achoyel. Havas, Maichu Dechsiv, Heviu Eskol Meiser El Beitza Oiser, bring all the Meiser to the Beitza Oiser, V'yiteref Bevesi, and the Navi says, Uv'chanuni no bezois. We just learned this in the Haftarah not too long ago. The Navi is saying, test me. Hashem is saying, test me. Give the Meiser, and I'm going to give you a schar. Om Hashem tzavachos, imol eftach lachem es harubois hashemayim, varikoisi lochem bracha ad b'lidoi. If you give Meiser, Hashem says, test me. I will pay you back, kifli kiflayim, and you'll have bracha ad b'lidai. We should all be zoicha to that, bekor of mamish. My ad b'lidai, Omer Rami Barav, Achiyivlu Sifsesechem Miloy Merdai. I thought that means until your lips get rubbed out, where you're saying, enough, enough, that's how much we're going to have. Like Trump says, you'll be sick of winning. So we should all be zoicha to that, the car of mamish, Baruchnis of the Gashmis. Omer Avalosa, we give him a kaimis, Haifia Ruach HaKodesh. In three places, it was Haifia Ruach HaKodesh, and Rashi has two pshatim in what Haifia means. Either it means Nigla, it became revealed in a time where it was needed, or it means it was literally announced, nishma b'kol godol, like a basko. So what are these three incidences? Zok t'gemar bevezdina shel Shem, ubevezdina shel Shmuel haramasi, ubevezdina shel Shloima. What was the case? Bevezdina shel Shem, d'chsiv vayaka Yehuda. This is when Yehuda said tzat kamimeni. It's bezdina shel Shem because Shem was no longer alive at the time. Rashi points out. Vayaka Yehuda v'yem tzat kamimeni. How could Yehuda have known that the baby was his? The same way he was mizana with this prostitute, maybe others were also. How could he be so sure that it was his child? I'm sorry? Yeah, but it doesn't mean she didn't service any other men. How do you know that the pregnancy came from this guy? The Gemara is asking, how do we know that she wasn't with any other men? So therefore, Yotzes Baskal V'Amora, Mimeni Yotzu Kavushim. Kavushim came out. A Baskal came out to Mimeni Yotzu Kavushim. Kavushim either means she was Zoicha to marry a Melech, and it's something that's said quietly. The other thing Kavushim means, it's referring to the Nevuah saying that she's going to have two children that are going to conquer the world, and those are David and Mashiach. Okay? Zog to Gemara weiter. Zog to Gemara weiter. B'vezina shel Shmuel d'chsiv. Shmuel said as follows: Hinni anu b'neged Hashem. Answer my question here in front of Hashem. B'neged Mashiach, in front of the king. As Mishar Milakach, did I ever take a ox from anybody? Did I ever ask anybody for anything? Did I ever demand anything from anybody that I have a right to do? Vayomer Kal said, no. Lo yashaktonu, you never took from us. But lo yiratisonu. Vayomer Eid Hashem. Vayomer Klal Yisrael said, no, you didn't. Then it says Lashon Yochid Vayomer Eid Hashem ve'Eid Mashiach. Hashem is an Eid. Ki lo mitzasim biyadim u'uma, which is Shmuel talking, and then the response is Vayomer Eid. Who said this? Vayomer Eid. If it was referring to Klal Yisrael responding, Vayomer Muboile. They said, Klal Yisrael said. But Vayomer Eid means when Shmuel said, did I take anything from anybody? Yotzes Baskol V'Omer Ani Eid B'Dover Zeh. A Baskol came out and said, I am an Eid, to say that Shmuel took nothing from anybody. And B'Vezina Shel Shloima, T'chsiv Vayan HaMelech, Vayomer. The new law is yellow. This is the famous story where Shlomo Melech said, cut the baby in half, and she said, Tanu lo asayela dachai, v'halmeis loy temisu. So Shlomo's Bezdin Paskin, he imay, this must be the mother. Mino yoda, how did he know? Dilma iaruma mi arma. Maybe that wasn't really the mother, but she's a clever woman. She said if she would say that, if I would say don't kill the baby, I know I'll get it. So Adarab, maybe how would he know that? So Gemara Yos's Baskel of Amra, he imay, a Baskel came out and said that in fact Shlomo Melech's psak was right. Amarav, mimai, I'm going to slug up all three things. Dilma, Yehuda, there was no Baskoil that said that this child was from Yehuda, but it was logic. Dilma Yehuda, Kivan the Choshev Yarche v'yoyme, he figured out that if she's pregnant now, they figured out when she must have conceived. V'yisrami, and it worked out to the same time that he was with her. So the chazinan machzakinan, the loy chazin loy machzakinan. We know she became pregnant on this day, and he knows that I was with her on that day. Oh, close enough, and we know that nobody else. We can't identify anybody else that was with her on this day. If it's just in general, could have been anybody. But on this day, I know I was with her. We can't be sure anybody else was with her. That would be good enough of a proof. Shmuel Nami, Kul Yisrael, Kari Luhu, Beloshen Yechidi. The Siv Yisrael Moshe B'Shem. The word Vayomer doesn't necessarily mean Hashem. It could mean Klal Yisrael, and it wasn't expressed Beloshen Rabbim because that's normal. It's a normal way of speaking as you find in other places. And Shlomo Nami, maybe how did he know? Midaha Kamar Hachamta, V'Loy Kamar Chamta. So Zok Gemara, we don't have a raya from Psukim that the Shemayim was moided to them that there was a haifa. And the Gemara, it must be that we know from one that I've told from Rebbe the Talmud, but we don't have a clear raya from the Psukim. Doshab Samloi, Meos v'Shlosh Esher Mitzvahs Nemer Lo Moshe. There were 613 mitzvahs were told to Moshe. Shlosh Meos v'Shishim v'Chamisha 365 are Lavin, Kimini Yemosha Chama, Umasayim Varboim Ushmoina Osor, which is 248. Asay is Asay, Keneged Evor of Shalodam, which Rashi says something very interesting. Ramach, the Chol Ever Oimerloi Asay Mitzvah. So every Aver is telling you to do a mitzvah. And the mitzvah loize shebechoyoy masirin lav shloi lav. Okay. The Zok Gemara, Amar from the micro. What do you see from the pasuk? It says Torah tziva lanu Moshe Meirasha. Torah is Bigamatria 611. Shishmeya v'chatzrei. Nahava anoichi v'liyah lecha mipi agvur shmanum. The two commandments of anoichi v'liyah came straight from Hashem. So they're not what the Torah told us. We know it directly. So 611 from the Torah and 2 from the Rabban Shalom. Shimon the Meshamek Sak. But David v'amidnu alach chasasrei. For us to keep 630 mitzvahs, that could be overwhelming. So David had to lighten it up as the Niskat Nadaris, and he said, just stick to 11 principles. Don't worry about it. 630. The Ksiv Mizmor David Hashem Miyog Balacha. He will be Zoicha to be in your tent. Miyishkei Markachecha. Someone who is the following: Hoylech Tamim 1, Hoyel Tzedek 2, Doiver Emes Bilvavai 3, Loy Rogel Al Shoinoi 4, Loyasil Re'eu Ra 5, V'Cherpel Nos Al Kroivoi 6, Nivze Be'edav Nimos 7, Vesir Shem Yechabed 8, Nishba Lahar V'Layamir is 9. Kasper le'nosam b'neshech is 10. V'shoichet al noki lo'ilokach is 11. Oisa ela, you do these 11 principles, lo'yimot lo'ilum, you'll never be undermined. So what are these 10 principles? Hoylech tamim ze Avram, that's referring to Avram Avinu. Yechsiv v'salech lefanai v'hayei tamim. Poyel tzedek is called Abba Chalakyo. The Mefarshim tell us that Abba Chalakyo, if someone came over to him during the day while he was working as a paid hourly laborer, and asked him something or said Shalom Aleichem, he wouldn't even look at him. Why? Because he was a poyel tzedek. He wouldn't waste a nanosecond from the employ of his boss. V'doiver emes bilvavoi to go in your Safra. Rashi relates a story where Safra was in the middle of saying Krishma and he had an item for sale. So a person comes up to him and says, I'll give you $500 for your item. He didn't answer, he's in the middle of Krishma. So the guy thought that maybe he didn't want to accept 500. I'll give you 550. Doesn't answer. By the time he finished Shmona Esrei, he was up to $1,200. And if Safar turned around and said, I'll give it to you for 500, because I had originally accepted that. So that's what it means. Emes Bilvavai. Didn't want to say a lie. So Yaakov Yaakov didn't want to lie. He was prompted to do so by Rivka. What does that mean? Now, the Mefarshim speak out. If you are masik vul on somebody, you're a Russia. So this means even in a case where you'd be allowed to, he would stay away from umnas chaverei. The cherpa loy notza al kroivon. What does that mean? Zamakar of kroivon. And there's two pshatim offered. One pshat is someone who helps his kroivon. That's also something. Or someone who won't cover up for his kroivon. Even if there's a tefillah on his kroivon, he'll mon them and he won't try to cover it up for his own political gain. Nivza be'ein of nimas. Someone who's nivza to the Rebbeinu Shalom is nimas to that person. He was mevada his father's bones because his father was a Russia. Where do you see that Yehoshaphat, the king, had tremendous respect for Yireh Hashem? He would stand up from his throne and hug him and kiss him, hopefully not a wet kiss. The Kariloi, Rebbe, Mori, Mori. What about Nishba Laharav Yomir? It's Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan, a Hebetainis, Acha Ovoi Levesi. He would be Makabal of Tainis till he gets to his house, because he wanted to be Mechanech himself in keeping in being Nizer in the Dorim. He wouldn't even charge interest to a goy because he didn't want to be involved in ribbis, and maybe if he takes ribbis, he'll by mistake take from a yid. Is kigoyin.
It's interesting. It's interesting because the pasuk says you should take ribbis from a goy.
It says lo nochi sashach.
That's right.
That's a good point. That's a good point. That's a good point. That's a very good point. But I guess he was so afraid that he'll take from me, he didn't want. That's a very interesting point, Aka. Okay, and Rashi shares a very interesting story with Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yosy, who had a Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yosy. What was the case of Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yosy? There was two cases. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yosy, he's the Oris case. What happened is he had an Oris. It means the Oris would work his field and bring him pears on a regular basis. One day the Oris came and brought him pears a little earlier, and he says, I'm here anyway for I didn't tell you, I figured I'll bring the pears while I'm at it. So Shmuel Bar says, I can't be the dying because you're doing me a tova, you're bringing me the pears, even though he brought him the pears anyway every week. Okay? And then Ksiv, I say you might la'olam, Kishahaya, Rabbi Gamliel, Magiel, Mikra, he would cry. Amai would say, Man the Avadul Chulu, Hudla Yamut, Hudla Yimait, Hachadim in a Yimait. How am I going to do all of these 11 things? This is not such a small feat. Amrulay miksiv oisa kol ela. Doesn't say you have to do them all to be zeichet to lo yimait. Alexiv afilu b'chadam inayu. Even if you do one of them, one of these milas, you'll be protected from the Jerusalem. Now bring your rye that a list doesn't mean all, it means any of. Don't become tummy with all these things, and then you're telling me only if you do touch all these things you're telling me, not one of them. Avada means each one individually. You will be zoiche to Elohimite. Boy Yeshayahu said 11 principles, that's still too much. It's Niskat Na'adoris even further. She limited it down to 6 things. D'chsev hoylech tzedakos, 1. V'doiver misharim, 2. Moyes bevetza mashakos. He doesn't like dishonest. Moyes 3. Noyar kapov. He shakes his hand off mitamoich b'shoichat from being supported with shoichat. That's number 4. Oitim oznoi mishmoya domim. He doesn't listen to bad things. But oitim einov meirish brown closes his eyes from seeing bad things. So who are those 6 principles? Hadat tzedakah is Avram Avinu. Ki yadativ leman asher yitzaveh. I know Avram will command his family to follow the ways of Hashem. That's why Hashem said, I have to tell them about Shloim. V'doiver misharim zeh she'ini maktet pnei chaver barab. Someone doesn't shepherd somebody public. Moyes bevatzim hashakos kagoyin Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, who Rashi says he had a different scenario. What happened was he wouldn't take Reish Hagez from somebody who was coming to him. He was a Kohen, and he refused to accept Reish Hagez from someone who was coming to him for the Torah, because he held he's stealing from the Kohen that would have otherwise received the Reish Hagez from this person. Okay, Noyer Kappa Mitoich B'Shvoichad Rabbi Yosy, who we already said that he wouldn't take the Din Torah because of the apprentice that brought him the fruits a little early. He would never hear someone speaking disrespectfully to our Rav and take it quietly. He would protest. Elazar Rab Shimon, we know the famous story where he died and his body was kept there in the attic, and one day his wife saw a worm crawl out of his ear, so she was afraid that maybe her husband did something wrong. Her husband said, "No, I once heard a Tzurvim Rabban get embarrassed and I wasn't moicha." So Rashi says, if he once heard he wasn't moicha, that he was punished, it was something that he was particularly nizer on. Someone who's very careful with what he looks at. And he will dwell in the heights. And even that's too much for us. She kept it down to 3 principles. If you notice, the songs only start when it's down to 3, because the longer ones are too hard for us. So 3 things. Asois mishpat zadin, that's doing what you're supposed to do. B'nodam l'makim. Havas chesed zagmilas chasodim in b'nodam l'chaverei. V'atzna leches is referring specifically to a type of gemilas chasodim, which is a tzos ameis and achnosus kala that is done b'tzina. No one's announcing that they're doing these things. V'leidvarim kal v'chaymer u'madvarim shein darken lasus b'tzina. I'm sorry. I didn't say that. Didn't say that yet. The Chama, I'm sorry, Umad Vorm Shein Darchan Lasos B'Tzina, Omer Torah Vatna Leches, Mother things like Kala, which are big public things. Nevertheless, the Torah says keep it down, keep it quiet. The Vorm Shedarchan Lasos B'Tzina, things that are normally done on the QT, Alachatz Kama V'Kama, should be kept concealed. And it still is too much for us. He lit him into 2 principles. Shenamar koyimar Hashem shimru mishpat v'atu tzedakah. And then ba'amos amidin alachas shenamar koyimar Hashem lebeis Yisrael darshuni, just look for me v'chiyu and you live. Matzkol v'Rab Nachman Yitzchak, who said darshuni just means one thing. Ema darshuni b'chol ha'Torah kula. Maybe we're demanding of us kol ha'Torah kula. Elo b'chavakuk v'amidin alachas shenamar v'tzadik v'munasa yichya. That's Rosh Hashanah Tzvi, right? Tadik Muvnasa Yichya, everything boils down to one thing: having a moon in the rose. And we struggle with that. Moshe Rabbeinu was going for 4 gzeros that were bad for Klal Yisrael, and Bo are brought Navim Ubitl. And 4 Navim came and were battle. Each of the Navim was a battle one of these things. Moshe Amar, it sounds like it's great, but Yishka and Yisrael betach bodad. That's a bracha. But in Yaakov, only if we fear sich like Yaakov Avinu. How do you expect us to fear sich like Yaakov Avinu? Forget about this condition with Yaakov. Mi Yaakov Yaakov. Who's going to live up to Yaakov? We want to have a Yishka Yisrael Bedach without living up to Yaakov. Hashem was masking to Amos. Moshe Amar, when you are amongst the goyim in Golus, you will not have any rest. Well, Yirmi of Amar, Haloich Largia Yisrael, Kalmar Hashem, Haloich Largia Yisrael will have rest even in Golus. Moshe Amar, Poiket Avos Albonim, the children will be punished for the fathers. By Yecheskel Bitla, and he said, Hanevesh Achaitas, he Thomas, but not the children. Moshe Amar, Vevaditam Bagoyim, you will become lost in the Goyim, you'll become eliminated amongst the Goyim. Voya Shov Omar, Voya Bayamahu, Yitaka B'Shayfar Gadol Ubo Oivdim Me'eretz Ashur. We will be recovered. Omarav, Mistafina, I'm still afraid Mihaikra Avibata Magoyim. Moshe said that I'm very afraid about it. Moscow for Papa. Who said the Ibadata means totally destroyed? Maybe it's Kaveda Hamispakechas. Maybe Hashem said you're going to be like someone who lost a precious jewel who won't stop looking for it. That's how much I'm going to look for you, Klal Yisrael. It says, that's why I'm afraid. Maybe it's maybe when it says you'll be eaten up by the goyim, it's like eating up kishun dulum. They eat the meat, they don't eat the seeds. Right? They eat the meat, they don't eat the seeds. When they eat gourds, no one eats cantaloupe seeds, right? Which means Klal Yisrael will always have zera to be able to reproduce and to continue. That's one shot. The other shot is these gives you stomach aches. If the goyim to start up with us, they're going to end up getting punished as well. Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elizabeth Nazariah, Rabbi Shua, Rabbi Kiva, Mahal Chamadech, a very famous Gemara. V'shamu koil hamoyne shal Rabbi mipatlaya. They heard a huge army that was very far away. Baruch me'ev Mil. That's how powerful the army was. You can hear them from so far away. They were crying. Rabbi Kiva Masachik. Rabbi Kiva found that amusing. Amr loim, the Mata Masachik. What are you laughing about? Look at our situation, and we're under the thumb of these horrible rulers. Why are you crying? They're sitting secure and with serenity, with peace. And us, the footstool of the Rabboni Shalom, the Beis Hamikdash, Sarif Be'ej, is burnt in a fire, and we should be calm. Veloy nifke, we shouldn't cry. Amar lahem lakach ani mitzachek. That's precisely why I'm laughing. Uma lo'ivre ritzoynei kach lo'isa ritzoynei alachas kama v'kama. If this is what they have, imagine what we're going to have. Shufam hayu oil in Yerushalayim. Kivin shegil lahar atzoyfim korah b'gdeim. They tore their clothing, including Rabbi Kiva. Kivin shegil lahar bayis rose shual shoyotim beis kachak kodashim hischilu hein boichem. They started to cry for Rabbi Kiva mitzachek. That unfortunately he wasn't mamish crying, he wasn't mamish laughing, he just writes kriya. He knows this is a sad situation, but he saw the light at the end of the tunnel. Why are you laughing? Vazara Karav Yumas, the Heliga Beis Hamikdash, where it says Vazara Karav Yumas, the Achshav Shulam Holchaba, V'loy Nifke, we shouldn't cry. That's why I'm laughing. Edim Nemonim, I'm going to take Edim Nemonim as Uriah HaKoyin, V'Sechaya Ben Yevrachio, two Nevi'im. What do they have to each other? They didn't even live at the same time. One lived by the first Beis Hamikdash, one by the second. The Chima'in Uriah Eitzel Zechariah. Uriah was B'Mikdash Rishon, and Zechariah B'Mikdash Sheni. Elatola Kosev Nevu'osa Shel Zechariah B'Nevu'osa Shel Uriah. The Nevu'ah of Zechariah from the second Beis Hamikdash about our hope is linked to the Nevuah from Uriah about our downfall. Because of your averes, Sion Sadatech Sion will be plowed like a field. And Bezachayksiv, Oyeshu Zakenim Uzakenois, Vechayvais Yushalayim, Vechayvais Ayur Yimalu, Yilodim, Yilodois Mesachkois, Bechayvaisenu. It's going to be a beautiful sight. The little children and elderly will be on the streets of Yerushalayim. Shal Uriah, until the Nevuah of Uriah was Niskayim, meaning Sion Sadat Techarish, Hayusim Misyare, Shalait Niskayim, Nevuah Shal Zechariah. I was afraid that maybe Zechariah's Nevuah would also not be Mechuyim. Achshav Niskayim Nevuah Shal Uriah, B'Yadua, Shenevuah Shal Zechariah Maskayemes. Veloshin Zer Amrloi, Akiva Nichamtanu, and then they repeated it. We'll have to hold off on the last words. Why did they say it twice? And those who say is they were going back not only on this thing about the Shualim, but they're going back on what he said about the army coming. But the question is, why didn't they say Nechamtanu right away when he gave them his answer? They should have said Nechamtanu right then and there. The Torah says they were afraid. Maybe Loisha means for you, Akiva, who came back from someone who was not showing with Torah mitzvahs, and you were Moshe Nefesh to come back to the mitzvahs. maybe that's what Oyser Return means. Oyser Return after not doing the Ratzon to come back. But we would not be Zoicha. Not everybody can stand. So they thought this was only for him. But when he said the second thing, which clearly applies to everybody, then they realized that they will also have a good day. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we're almost finished Makos, not quite, but almost. And now we have to start a new parak that's a lot harder than what we've been learning until now. But the first Mishnah actually takes us on a little bit of a tour through Shas. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. We're learning about Shavuos. Shavuos has to do with Seder Nezikin. Shavuos Shtaim Shein Harba. There's two types of Shavuos that really split up into two categories, that split into four categories. Because you could swear al lehba, Shavuot that I will eat, or Shavuot that I won't eat. It's Shein Harba because I can also swear Shavuot that I ate or Shavuot that I didn't eat. So it's two on lehba that also fit into two of l'shavar. Now, right off the bat, Tosfos asks, why are we calling this Masechta? Why we're starting with Shavuos Shtaim Shein Barsha? Correct, Tosfos ha the loy pasach hay Masechta with kol kinuye Shavuos k'Shavuos k'de pasach nedarim v'nazir. Shavuos are verbal commitments, but we have two Masechtas that start off with a kol kinuye, telling you any expression of a nether is like a nether, any expression of a Naziris is like a Naziris. It wouldn't make sense to start off Shavuos that way. Mishum de Tarnam Makos Kasol. The reason why we start Shavuos this way is because we just left Makos, Kidim Afarish B'Gemara, and therefore Hutzrach Leftayach B'Shtayim Shein Arba, because that's a segue. That's a segue from Makos. I guess I'm not sure what the Shtayim Shein Arba is in Makos, unless it's talking about the multiple Malchus that you get when you do things. I'm not sure what that's referring to. Since we didn't start with it, we never go back to it. Okay, let's see the Gemara right. Shavuos Shtaim Shein Arba, number one. Yediyas HaTumah. Now, there's something called a carbon oil of yored that actually applies to three averis. It applies to Shavuos Bitoy, which is what our Masechta is talking about. It applies to Tumas Mikdash v'Kadoshav, meaning if someone went into the Beis Hamikdash when he was Tamei, or if he ate kosher when he was Tamei b'Shoigeg, and then he found out about it, he brings a korban oil of yored. So there's Yediyas HaTumah are Shtayim Shein Arba. The way it works with Tumah is if you never knew you were Tamei, you were totally oblivious to it, and then you went into the Beis Hamikdash, you don't bring a korban oil of yored. You only bring a korban oil of yored if you knew you became Tamei, and then you forgot that you were Tamei, and you either went into the Beis Hamikdash or ate kachim, and then you found out afterwards that you went in when you were Tamei. That's when you bring a korban oil of yored. So what does it mean? There's Arba Yediyas HaTumah Shtayim Shein Arba. It means as follows. It means either you didn't know that you were Tamei, so you forgot that you were Tamei, and you went into the Beis Hamikdash. You forgot that you were Tamei and ate kachim. That's the Shtayim. The Shein Arba is you knew you were Tamei, but you didn't realize that you were walking into the Beis Hamikdash, or you didn't realize that you were eating kachim. So there's two different things of unknowns that will trigger a korban oil of yored. Shtayim Shein Arba. Yitzis HaShabbos is Shtayim Shein Arba. We know that if you're being moichi something from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, there's two ways you could do it. You could pick something up in Rosh Hashanah, walk out, and go to Rosh Hashanah. That's the conventional way. But you could also be in the Rosh Hashanah. You could stick your hand into the Rosh Hashanah, pick something up, and bring it to you. So that's the Shtayim Shein Arba, because there's two ways of taking out of Rosh Hashanah. I'm sorry, there's two ways of taking something out of Rosh Hashanah into Rosh Hashanah, and there's two ways to bring something from Rosh Hashanah back into the Rosh Hashanah. Either you carry it with you, or you reach and pull it in. Mars Nagoyim Shtayim Shein Arba. Shnayim Shein Arba. There's also Mars Nagoyim. There's two types of Nagoyim, but each type has different shades of white that fall under its category. Tosfos comments everywhere it says Shtayim Shein Arba, Lashon Nekeva, but by Mars Nagoyim it says Shnayim Shein Arba, which is Lashon Zocher. So Tosfos gets into a little diktuk class. Es sheyesh bo yediyah betchila v'yediyah b'soif The Helam Bentayim Hareza Bailu V'Yored. Notice the Gemara now, the Mishnah now is focusing not on Shavuos, it's focusing on the carbon. And it says that the only way to be chayav a carbon oil of Yored, if you knew you were tamei, you forgot, you went into the base of Mikdash, and then you remember it again. That's what there's an oil of Yored. But yesh ba yedi b'tchila, ve'ein ba yedi b'soif. What if you never found out that you were tamei? Which means you're totally oblivious. You can't bring a carbon. You don't even know that you brought one. You don't even know that you were over in Aveira. So what's mechaper you for that temporarily till you discover that you were over in Aveira? Seir hanasa b'fnim. There was a seir on Yom Kippur that the blood of the seir was spritzed inside on the mizbeach hapanimi. It's that seir that's toila you until you will discover that you were tummy. You'll bring your oil of Yored. And so Sira Nasa B'Fnim Yom Kippurim, combination of the powers of Kapar of Yom Kippur and the Sira Nasa B'Fnim will be Toila Ad Sheyivad Aloi till he will find out, and then V'Yavi B'Oila V'Yored. Ein Bo Yidi B'Tchila. What if he never ever knew that he was Tamei, and he walked into the Beis Hamikdash, and he found that after that he became that he was Tamei, but he never knew at the time. So he didn't know Yidi B'Tchila. So the halach is a different seir covers you for that one. That's the seir hanasa b'chutz. There was another seir that they brought that they spritzed the blood on the outside mizbeach on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur mechaper. So every slight difference in how the tumah you were over the isur of tumah in Beis Hamikdash, depending on the scenario, there'd be a different carbon that would cover for it. There's going to be one time that it makes it easy. All these carbonates cover for everything, so you don't have to know details. But right now, every carbon is earmarked for a specific type of Aveira. Shenemar milavad chatasi kippurim al masha zeh mechaper zeh mechaper. They're both mechaper for these types of things. Ma pnimi ein mechaper ela al davar sheyesh bo yediyah. There was a yediyah at some time. Al vachidon ein mechaper ela al davar sheyesh bo yediyah. So we'll say that the pnimi is mechaper if you had a yediyah. If you had yediyah before, and the chiton is mechaper if you had the idea after. What if you're totally oblivious? You never knew that you were tamei. Where do you get a kapara for such an aveira? You never knew you were tamei, and you walked into the Beis Hamikdash. It's seirei haragolim, the seirim that are brought on every Yom Tiv. I think it's the Musaf. Useir Rosh Chodashim, and the seir we bring for a Chodesh mechaprim. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That is the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that every single carbon is earmarked to a very specific aveira. Rabbi Shimon Aimer, nah. Sirei haragolim mechaper. You know it's mechaper for someone who was always oblivious. He never knew he became tamei. Only the seirim from Yom Tov. Avoloi sirei Rosh Chodashim. The sirei Rosh Chodashim do not mechaper for that. So what are the sirei Rosh Chodashim for? Valma sirei Rosh Chodashim mechaper. For what aveira does the sirei Rosh Chodesh be mechaper you from? The Gemara ala tahor sha'achal es atamei. That's referring to a tar person that had kachim that was tamei. That you're not allowed to do either. That's what the Shirish Chodesh is mechaper you on. Reb Meir Aimer, kol ha-seirin kaparoson shava. All the seirin brought and all the Yom Tovim with Chodesh, and Yom Kippur, it's all one kapar, and it's for al tumas mikdash v'kadosha. Makes it much easier. All of them are all universal. Why do you need so many for the same aveira? There it is, very simple. If you did an aveira after the first one was brought, you have the second one. So we're constantly bringing the seer. It's like you got to pay your GST every quarter, every month. They keep on bringing carbonas to deal with anything that happened in the last quarter. Rab Shimon said that the seer Rosh Chodashim were mechaper on a tahor person who ate tamei kachim. V'shel regolim, and the serum that were brought in Yom Tovim are mechaperim al she'ein bo yediyah loy b'tchila v'loy b'soif. And V'shel Yom Kippurim is mechaper al she'ein bo yediyah b'tchila al yesh bo yediyah b'soif. Okay, so Amr Loi, they asked him, so this is sort of the reason why we're chazering over Reb Shimon Shita is because we're analyzing it more deeply. So Amr Loi, they asked Reb Shimon, Ma'u sheyikravu zeh bozeh. So what was the shaila? The shaila is where is it? Here it is. Ma'u sheyakrav l'she'em se'iroi shel yamam. So Reb Shimon Hi Nakalim should boy remember Amaloi Maushik im Avat Seir shall Hofish Yom Kippurim. Let's say the Seir that was Hofish for Yom Kippurim got lost. So you had to get another one, and then you find it. Now, are these Averis close enough? If you lose the oila and then you find it, you can use it for someone else's oila. But if you lost the Seir for Yom Kippur, which was earmarked for Enyudiyah B'tchila V'yesh V'yidiyah B'soif, and now you want to use it for a different type of tumah carbon, like Enyudiyah Tchila or Soif, which is, let's say, for one of the Yom Tovim, can you use that Seir? Or no, it's only earmarked for this specific thing. Amal Yekrivu. Amr Loi, I Hoyel V'in Kaparos and Shava, Hey Chraven Zebaseh. Lemaisa, they're not coming to be mechaper in the exact same avera. Yom Kippur is being mechaper on Shein Yudih B'tchila, or Yesh B'yidiyah L'Soif, and the Seir Regalim are mechaper on Ein Yudiyah B'tchila or B'soif, and the Seir of Rosh Chodesh is for Torah Shachal Satome. How could you substitute one for the other? Amalem, it's good enough. Kulan Boyin L'chaper Al Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshim. Even though they're not all coming to mechaper on the same avera, but they're all being mechaper on the general category. Therefore, one can replace the other. Rabbi Shimon Yehuda Omer Mishmoi, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, that Seirei Rosh Chodeshim are mechaper ala Torah she'achal satamei. So now he builds it up. So the lowest avera is a Torah person who etamei. That's what the Rosh Chodeshim deal with. Moisav aleim shel regalim, the Seirim of Yom Tovim, that they're also mechaper, shemechaperin al Torah she'achal esatamei ve'al she'ein bo yediyah loy b'tchila v'loy b'soif. There's another chadgajo. So basically, each additional carbon we're going to list covers everything from the previous carbon and then some. Moisav aleim shel Yom Kippurim shemechaperin al Torah she'achal esatamei ve'al she'ein bo yediyah loy b'tchila v'loy b'soif ve'al she'ein bo yediyah b'tchila av yesh ba yediyah b'soif. Amrullah, the same question. If one of these gets lost and you replace it and then you find the original one, can you use it for one of the other karbonis? Amrullah Hain. Amrullah told him, Im Kain, if that's the case, Yushal Yom Kippurim, Craven, Rosh Chodesh. I understand that the Seir of Rosh Chodesh of Yom Kippur, you can bring on Rosh Chodesh because the Seir of Yom Kippur will cover for it because it does all that anyway. Aval Heich Shal Rosh Chodesh, Craven Yom Kippurim. It's not mechaper on enough things. How could it cover for the long list of averis that Yom Kippur is mechaper for? That's not covered in its scope. It's all the same. They're all coming for a Yoni Tum. What about if there wasn't B'shogi? What about B'mezid? Someone went in and was Tamei, he went into the base of Mikdash, or he had a carbon knowing that he's Tamei. For that, Seir Anasa B'fnim, the Yom Kippur Mechaprin, Al Shar Averis, Shabbatayra, on all the other Averis of the Torah, Hakalois, the lighter Averis, the Chamuris, and the more severe Averis, Vasadoinois, the Mezids, Ashagogos, the Shogig, Hoidav, Loyada, whether you know about them, whether you didn't know about them, Asei, Veloisese, Krisois, Mrs. Bezdin, all of these things, Seir HaMishtaleach Mechaper. The Seir HaMishtaleach is very powerful. It's Mechaper on all Averis. It's almost a catch-all. Echad Yisraelim, Vechad Kaihanim, Vechad Kohen Meshuach, which seems like they're all the same. And then a second later, the Mishnah says there's a difference, which the Gemara is going to ask. Ma bein Yisraelim l'Kaihanim u'l'Kohen Meshuach. The difference is Elishapar Mechaper l'Kaihanim al Tumash Mikdash v'Kadoshim. The par, instead of the Seir Plim that covered all of Klal Yisrael by the coin, it's the par that Aaron brings on Yom Kippur for the Kalim that's mechaber that aver. Rabbi Shimon Omer Kishem Shedam HaSeir Hanasa B'fnim Mechaper Al Yisrael Kach Dam Apor Mechaper Al HaKahanim. So it's the Zrikas Hadam that creates the kapara. So what he's saying is he's arguing on what we said earlier. Echad Kayhan Vechad Yisraelim are shovin the kabara sharaveris, and what's moichal everything the Seir Mishtaleach vein chalukim b'chaparoton ela b'tumash mikdash v'kadosha. All other averis, everybody's covered by the Seir Mishtaleach. The only averis that are pulled out of that rule are tumash mikdash v'kadosha, where they're separate karbonis for anybody who does these affairs. And on that, the Kamar Shimon, and he says, Shem Shat Moite B'dam Masir Pnimi, Shemechaper Al Yisrael, Kaparotzer Beloy Shum Vidui. There is no vidui. It's just the Zrikas Adam alone is Mechaper. El Kaporis Hazoyis Adam. How do we know that it's not the vidui? Because Rashi tells us she'ain vidui b'sir pnimi. The Kohen didn't say vidui, but it's sir pnimi. Ela b'mishtalech. He only said vidui b'sir mishtalech. So you see, just spritzing the dam affects the kapora. Kach dam apar mechaper b'lo shum vidui la kahanim. So too, just the dam of the par will be mechaper on the kahanim. But the problem is on the par for the Kohen, he said vidui as well. So that vidui must be covering for something else. So therefore, the dam alone is mechaper l'kahanim al tumash mikdash v'kadoshov. A yaiser levidui shall par. There's still the vidui of the par. That's b'mokum vidui shall sir mishtalech l'chaper al kahanim b'shar aveiros. The ein lem kapar b'shar mishtalech. So all Rabbi Shimon is saying is the kahanim are completely separate. Klal Yisrael gets their kapar on all aveiros through the sir mishtalech. The kahanim get it from the par that's there for the kahanim. Kashem shavidu shall sar mishtalech mechaper al Yisrael. Kach vidui shall par mechaper al kahanim. Okay, we'll stop here. Tomorrow's Wednesday, tomorrow's Thursday. Okay, so if we could learn Daf Gimel tomorrow, I think we're going to be ahead because I think Sunday is Daf Gimel. Because if I'm not mistaken, Friday is the last Daf of I think the seam is on Friday. It's the last Daf, which means Daf Beis is Shabbos, Daf Gimel is Sunday. So if you learn Daf Gimel tomorrow, then we'll be good to learn Daf Dalet tomorrow. The Daf Dalet on Monday. Shkoich. Everyone should have an awesome day. What's that?